The stagecoach slammed to a stop so violently that Grace Anderson nearly flew from her seat. Outside, a Montana blizzard tore through the tiny town of Hecla with the fury of something alive and angry. Snow came down sideways, so thick it erased the entire world. Wind hammered the coach like fists against wood, rattling every board and freezing the air until Grace could see her own breath clouding in front of her face. She pressed her gloved hands against the frosted window and saw absolutely nothing, no buildings, no people, no landmarks of any kind, just endless white that seemed determined to swallow her whole. 2,000 miles. That was the distance she had traveled from Boston to reach this frozen wasteland. 2,000 miles to marry a man whose face she had never seen, whose voice she had never heard except through carefully written letters that revealed almost nothing about who he really was. Her entire future now balanced on this single terrifying moment, and Grace wondered if she had made the worst mistake of her life. The driver's shout barely cut through the howling wind, but Grace understood what it meant without needing to hear the words clearly. This was the end of the line, the final destination, the point of no return. Her heart pounded against her ribs so hard it hurt, as she fastened the last button on her wool coat with trembling fingers. Back in Boston, this coat had seemed thick and protective, sturdy enough to handle any weather. Here in January of 1878, standing at the edge of a Montana winter, it felt about as useful as paper. She drew in a shaking breath, pushed the heavy coach door open with both hands, and stepped down into snow that immediately came up past her knees. The cold hit her like a physical punch to the chest, knocking the air from her lungs. The wind tore at her clothes with vicious hands, ripping her bonnet clean off her head and sending it spinning into the white void. She stumbled hard, her boots sliding helplessly on ice hidden beneath the snow, panic flashing hot and sudden through her entire body. Strong hands caught her arm before she could fall. "Miss Anderson." The voice was deep and calm, cutting straight through the chaos like a knife through cloth. Grace looked up into a face weathered by years of sun and wind, marked by a hard life, but softened by eyes as blue as a summer sky. Snow clung to the brim of his hat and the broad shoulders of his heavy coat. He was taller than she had imagined from his letters, broader too, solid in a way that made the violent storm feel just slightly less terrifying. "I am Grace Anderson," she managed to say through chattering teeth. "Owen Ellis," he replied, tipping his hat with old-fashioned courtesy that seemed absurd in the middle of a blizzard. "I have been waiting out here in this cold for you." There was no complaint in his tone, no resentment or anger, just a simple statement of fact delivered with the same calm certainty he might use to comment on the weather. His hand stayed firm on her arm, holding her steady against the wind that wanted to knock her down. "I am sorry," Grace said quickly. The train was delayed in Chicago, then again farther west. "Come inside before you freeze," Owen said, already taking her travel bag with his free hand. He guided her through the snow toward a small building beside the general store, its windows glowing with soft yellow light that looked like salvation itself. Every single step felt like work, her heavy skirts growing heavier with accumulated snow, her legs burning from cold that cut straight through fabric to bone. By the time Owen pushed the door open and ushered her inside, Grace could no longer feel her toes or fingers. Warmth wrapped around her like a physical embrace, a pot-bellied stove glowing in the corner and filling the room with blessed heat. The space was half office and half living quarters, clearly belonging to a man who lived alone but kept his surroundings neat. A desk sat by the window with papers stacked in orderly piles. A narrow bed rested against the far wall, made with military precision. Everything was clean and simple, and organized in a way that spoke of careful discipline. "Sit here," Owen said, pulling a chair close to the stove. "I will make coffee." Grace sank down gratefully, watching him move with quiet confidence as he tended the fire and filled a worn coffee pot with practiced ease. "You are the sheriff," Grace said, noticing the star pinned to his vest. "Town marshal," Owen corrected gently. "Similar work, though. Did my letters not mention it?" "They did," Grace admitted, heat rushing to her face. "I am just flustered right now." "No need for apologies," he said, handing her a tin cup of steaming coffee. "You came a very long way. That takes real courage." Grace wrapped both hands around the cup, letting warmth seep back into her frozen fingers. "It was desperation," she heard herself say before she could stop the words. She winced, expecting disappointment or concern to cross his features, but Owen only nodded slowly and sat down across from her. "I suppose we are both desperate in our own ways," he said matter-of-factly. "Otherwise we would not be here doing this." His honesty shocked her more than anything else could have. In his letters, Owen had been polite and careful, revealing very little beyond basic facts. Hearing him speak so plainly now felt like unexpected kindness, like he had chosen to meet her as an equal rather than hiding behind careful words and pleasant lies. "I should tell you," Grace said softly. "I may not be what you expected at all." "None of us ever are," Owen replied, studying her with steady blue eyes. "I am not looking for perfection, Grace. I am looking for a partner." The simplicity of that statement cracked something open inside her chest. "Please call me Grace," she said. "Just Grace." "Grace?" he repeated slowly, like he was tasting the name for the first time. "And you had best call me Owen." Outside, the wind continued howling with undiminished fury. Grace glanced toward the door, toward the storm that had carried her to this moment. "Will we be married tonight?" she asked. Owen shook his head. "The preacher lives miles outside town. We would freeze before we got halfway there. I have arranged a room for you at the boarding house. I will stay here. We will marry once this storm breaks." Relief and disappointment tangled together in her chest. Part of her wanted it over with, the waiting finished. Another part felt grateful for the pause, for time to breathe and think. The walk to the boarding house felt endless. Snow blinded her completely, wind stealing her breath every time she tried to inhale. Owen wrapped a scarf around her face and kept firm hold of her arm, steady as stone while the world tried to tear them apart. When they finally reached the door, Grace was shaking so hard she could barely stand, ice clinging to her eyelashes and freezing her tears before they could fall. Mrs. Patterson, the boarding house owner, took charge immediately. She ushered Grace inside, helped her up narrow stairs, and settled her in a small clean room with a fire already burning bright. "You are safe now," the woman said firmly. "We will get you warm." Owen brought Grace's bag to the room and turned to leave at once. "Thank you," Grace said, clutching a quilt around her shoulders. Owen paused in the doorway, warmth flickering in those blue eyes. "I am glad you made it safely." That night, as the storm raged on outside, Grace lay awake listening to wind howl and thinking about tomorrow. If the weather cleared, she would become Owen Ellis's wife, would bind herself to a stranger with a past she did not yet know. Morning dawned bright and brutally cold. The storm had passed, leaving the town buried under glittering snow that sparkled like diamonds in the sunlight. Mrs. Patterson helped Grace into her best dress, a deep green wool gown she had saved for this exact moment. Owen arrived at noon precisely, freshly shaved and wearing his best suit. When he saw Grace, he stopped short, surprise plain on his face. "You look lovely," he said simply. "And you look very handsome," Grace replied. The church was small and plain, filled with just a handful of townspeople who had braved the cold to witness this union between strangers. Grace stood beside Owen, her hand in his, feeling the solid warmth of him. When the preacher spoke the final words and Owen kissed her, gentle and respectful, Grace felt the weight of the moment settle deep in her bones. She was married now. As Owen led her through snow toward the house that would now be hers, Grace's heart raced with fear and hope tangled impossibly together. She had come through a storm to reach this man, and whatever waited ahead, there was absolutely no turning back now. Owen carried Grace over the threshold, his arm steady, as if she weighed nothing at all. The gesture startled her, but also made something warm bloom in her chest. He set her down gently inside, shutting the door against the cold. The house smelled of wood smoke and clean air. A fire crackled in the hearth, and everything felt ready, prepared, as if the space had been waiting just for her. "I wanted everything to be warm when you arrived," Owen said, suddenly sounding uncertain. "It is perfect," Grace replied, and she meant it completely. The house was simple but well cared for, with a sturdy table, chairs, shelves lined with books, and a solid stove. Owen showed her the bedroom, pausing at the door like he was not sure how to cross that particular line. "If you would rather take this room alone," he said carefully, "I can sleep in the other." Grace studied his face, and saw no demand there, only genuine concern for her comfort. She placed her hand on his arm. "We are married, Owen," she said softly. "We will share it." Relief flickered across his features. "I will go at your pace," he promised. Days settled into rhythm soon after. Owen rose early to make his rounds as town marshal. Grace learned the house, learned the stove, learned how light moved through the windows at different times of day. She walked the streets of Hecla, getting to know the town and its people. Most were kind. Mrs. Patterson visited often. Martha Hayes from the general store invited Grace for coffee and conversation. Slowly, the town stopped feeling strange and started feeling like community. Grace found her place at the schoolhouse, helping Miss Harmon with younger children. The sound of laughter and recited lessons filled a part of her that had been empty for a very long time. Owen listened intently each evening as she told him about her day, about the children and their struggles and small victories. "You were meant for this," he told her once, pride clear in his voice. Spring arrived slow and careful, wildflowers pushing through thawing ground. Grace realized one morning that she was with child. When she told Owen, joy and fear crossed his face in equal measure. "This time will be different," she promised, seeing the shadow of his past losses. "We will be careful." The months that followed were filled with quiet happiness and anxious hope. When labor came with the first snow of autumn, it was long and hard, but Owen stayed by her side, holding her hand and whispering strength into the darkness. When their son finally cried out, healthy and strong, Owen wept openly. They named him Oliver. Fatherhood softened Owen in ways Grace had not known were possible. He held the baby like something sacred, his old grief easing little by little. Life moved forward steadily. Another child came, then another, then years stacked upon years. Their love grew deep and steady, built on shared days and shared burdens. The fear that had once followed Grace everywhere finally faded, replaced by quiet certainty. She had come to Hecla desperate and terrified. Now she stood rooted in a life she had built side by side with a man who had once been broken just like her, and neither of them had given up. In their 62nd year together, Owen passed peacefully in his sleep, Grace holding his hand as he went. Her grief was heavy but full of gratitude. They had been given a lifetime together. When she passed 3 years later, they buried her beside Owen beneath a tall pine. Their stone read simply, "He waited in the cold, she came through the storm, together they found home."